Hello again, book lovers, and today I'm going to talk about Go Down Together, the true untold story of Bonnie and Clyde by Jeff Guinn. I had to get right to the end of this until I discovered that they used to be called Clyde and Bonnie until the Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway film version of events came out. Now, that film is a fantasy film compared with the true untold story as we're promised here and as we seem to get. I got this book in an Oxfam charity bookshop in Oxford. And so this is a little symbol of the pre-online days when you would go into a bookshop, and how I loved to do that, and I hope people still do, with no idea what you were going to buy. Browse around the sections you like. In my case would be pop sciences, biographies, history, philosophy, and marvel at the extremely cheap prices that are being asked. In the end, you get a tatty or not so tatty paperback home, the sort of book about which people would ask me, why are you reading this? Are you interested in gangsters and true crime stories? Well, no, not really. But it did attract my attention as I was browsing through the second-hand bookshop. You begin to read it and you think, wow, that was a bargain. And this one was. Very well researched, with the kind of period detail that draws me to this kind of book. For example, the fact that the law agencies are always referred to as the laws in the plural by these gangsters. And if you want to know what cars they drove, what guns they used, exactly what they had in their arsenal, the injuries they sustained, the relations they had with their families, it's all in here and all very well researched and very well documented. So what struck me about this story? There's a peculiar dynamic to the book in that by the time you're about halfway through, and there are 360 pages before we reach the end notes, which are copious, if you like reading them, which I often do. At about halfway, as I say, you get the impression that there's just no way out for these people. It's going to end how it's going to end. In fact, they're conscious of it. They discuss what's going on the headstones of the graves, where they're going to be buried, and all that. There's a kind of tension here between the glamorous portrayal in the popular press and the hard lifestyle that the Clyde gang and its various changing members had to actually live, sleeping in barns, fields, incognito for days at a time in motor courts, as they were called, the motor car being still quite a new thing in the 1930s. Clyde Barrow in fact wrote a letter of praise to Henry Ford, saying how great his cars were. At least we're 90% sure it was Clyde Barrow. And the other side of the tension is that in fact it was a kind of glamorous lifestyle. They grew into it, they liked being famous. They asked a poor young lad who they bumped into as they were hiding out, have you heard of any bank robbers, hoping that he would name them, and he didn't. Clyde Barrow and Bonnie to some extent seemed to have rigid codes about how you should treat poor people especially, and honest people, and family. And in these 21st century times of liberal sentiments, I would guess I'm kind of not into the victim blaming, criminal sympathising ethos. But when you dig into the story of the backgrounds, the West Dallas of the time, the description reminded me of nothing so much as the African townships that I learned about in the Mandela autobiography. And again, the swinging pendulum of attitudes contrasts that to the lackadaisical style with which it seems you could enter into a grocery store if you couldn't find a bank and simply rob it, maybe a petrol station. Communication was nothing like it is today. There were also laws which prohibited pursuit of criminals over state lines, etc., etc. I was interested to find out that the governor of Texas in the time of Bonnie and Clyde was a woman called Ma Ferguson. She was considered to be soft on crime and finally lost her political position to a tougher opponent. But that said, it to the modern ear and the modern eyes looked like a hell of a tough time with the depression, the dust storms, the unemployment, and if you ended up getting put in prison, as both Clyde, Barrow and Bonnie Parker did for periods, the incredibly terrible treatment of the prisoners, especially in the Eastham Farm complex where Clyde got shipped out to. The only way out of the hard labour was to accidentally, in inverted commas, cut off your fingers or toes. So poor old Clyde did that. He cut off 2 of his own toes with a shovel less than a week before he was going to be transferred anyway, due to somebody acting on his behalf behind his back. And as you can imagine, a lot of stories like that of behind the scenes machinations. But what happened to Clyde Barrow there puts the rest of his life into a different kind of perspective, as he was continually and brutally raped almost every night by a large hulking inmate who he ended up killing. One of the lifers said that he would pretend to be the killer so that Clyde didn't get the blame, but scrawny little Clyde, who was a lot slighter than people imagined him to be when they got up close, for example at the funeral when they were gawping at the body, scrawny little Clyde smacked the guy over the head with a metal pipe, and that was his first murder. In his own head he seems not to have been a murderer. He only shot if he was shot at, etc. And he did escape several times from ambushes and the like. The story bowls along. The noose gets tighter. The personalities and real characters of both Clyde and Bonnie come out well. And if you like this kind of true crime story, this is a good one. First published in 1988, but not until 2009 in Great Britain. My edition being from 12 years ago, 2010. And as I say at the end of all my book reviews, yes, it's a recommended read, because if it hadn't been, I wouldn't have bothered finishing it.